Hey guys, welcome to another video, and tonight we are talking about The Death of Sleep by McCaffrey. I'm going to try and keep it brief because this is a book that I've just finished, and frankly, it's very late where I am right now, so I can't really be awake for too much longer. Alright, so The Death of Sleep was written by McCaffrey and Jody Lynn Nye. It's the second book in the Planet Pirates trilogy, and I initially thought this was a follow-up to Sassenach, which I read and reviewed last year. I believe I did the video last week, I think. Alright, so links to that will be in the description. If you haven't read this book, I'm going to try not to spoil it, but there are certain details that I will be going into, so keep in mind there may possibly be some spoilers ahead, because I am going to be talking about certain plot details. Okay. So, initially, when I started The Death of Sleep, I thought it was a direct sequel to Sassenach, meaning that it took the events from the previous book and built onto them. So we saw Sassenach bonding with the characters that she had met, previously. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, this book told an entirely different story to Sassenach, and nothing really is mentioned about the previous book. So my optimism kind of changed a little bit, and it's kind of unusual. Because usually when I read a sequel, I'm wary, but at the same time, this was Anne McCaffrey we're talking about, so I'm a huge fan of her work. I'm not too keen, I have to admit, I'm not too keen on the books that she's co-authored with other people. Typically what I find is that the writing styles just don't mesh very well. That said, the story here was very interesting, and I'm glad I read it. So, what is the story? The story, in this case, follows a woman named Lindsay Mespel, and she is a medic on a ship. She's due to start work at a mining platform, and she leaves her teenage daughter behind, goes on this trip, and meets with an accident. Right? This accident forces her to go into cold sleep, so basically cryogenic sleep. Right? When she finally wakes up, it's sort of 62 years later, if I remember correctly. I've only just finished the book, so my memory is a little overloaded by the other details, but if I remember correctly, it was 62 years or so that have gone by, and she suddenly has to adapt. And I kind of try to find her place in the grand scheme of things. Now, she adapts, sort of, going for medical training. She gets herself trained up again. She finds that the medical training that she had is now outdated, so she needs to sort of get recertified, I guess you could say. But she does that. She, eventually kind of finds herself in a lot of trouble. After she's gotten herself certified again, she ends up in another accident on her way to reunite with her daughter. and ends up waking up from cold sleep 10 years later. So, and then again has to adapt to what's happened while she's been out. So that's the plot line in general. It's very different because the plot isn't like Sassenach at all. There's mention of the planet pirates and Lunzi's desire for revenge. Okay, she feels like these pirates have kind of wrecked her life in a way. And so it is a revenge story, but it's also sorry guys, got a bit tongue-tied, an adaptation story. It's the story of somebody who is sort of forced into circumstances that they really can't control, and they have to adapt to them and figure out how to make things work. Initially, my initial thoughts on the book were primarily confusion. I mean, the book, as I said at the start of this video, the book didn't follow Sassenach at all in terms of the plot line. So this felt very much like more like a prequel than a sequel. And so I'm not too keen on prequels, I have to admit. So that kind of had me a bit worried. But I stuck with it because, well, as I said, I'm a huge fan of Anne McCaffrey's work, and I was curious. I mean, it's not every day that you get a story like this, as far as I'm aware. In general, if I had to guess, the trilogy seems to have been set up to kind of link the two characters. So we've got Sassenach in the first book, we've got Lunzi in the second book, and my theory, and I'm reasonably sure about this, is that the two of them are going to kind of team up for the third book, for the next book in the trilogy, to do battle with the pirates. I really hope I didn't just spoil the third book. But yeah, I'm kind of curious now about that. Overall, the characters were more or less unique. They were all likable. The world building is, as always, it's spectacular. McCaffrey really did put a lot of detail into it, and I'm pretty sure that she and Nye, were basically in the same room, like every day that they were writing, going, oh, okay, so this is what's happening in this scene, and then they kind of try and put it all together. Because the writing styles actually mesh. In this case, they mesh really well. There is not really a page or a section that felt more like Anne McCaffrey or more like this Jodie Lynn Nye. It felt very, very, very much the same. There is a connection, which I quite like as well, to the previous book, where if you guys have read Sassenach, towards the end of the book, and this is the spoiler, the big spoiler that I warned you guys about at the start, Sassenach meets with Lunzi, who is apparently her great, many times over grandmother. And they kind of, get to know each other a little bit at the end of the first book. Now, in that book, it's also mentioned a few times that there was a mutiny from the initial colonists on Ireta. Now, at one point in The Death of Sleep, they land on this planet called Ireta. It's Lunzi and a couple of others with a group of heavy worlders, these big, bulky people who have been primarily adapted to planets that have a heavier gravity than Earth, right? And it's mentioned a couple of times towards the end of Sassenach that at one point the heavy worlders had a bit of a rebellion in mind, and you kind of get to see that mutiny happen here in the Death of Sleep. I won't go into details on how, but you get to see it, and it's fantastic. I'm not sure if it's the same mutiny, but I have a feeling that it is. I'm not too sure. I'm hoping that Generation Warriors, the next book, will kind of shed light on that and show us a little bit about what happened between the time of the mutiny or after the mutiny and Sassenach. But yeah, it was fun to sort of see that. Another thing that I really liked was that this is a brilliant standalone novel. I mean, yes, it's part of a series, but it really doesn't feel like it. You don't need to have read Sassenach in order to enjoy The Death of Sleep. It's the same thing with Sassenach. You don't need to have read the Dinosaur Planet novels to enjoy the book. Yes, the two books, Sassenach and The Death of Sleep, part of the Errata series, which was Dinosaur Planet and Dinosaur Planet Survivors, if I remember correctly. I'm going to be covering those books later in the year, or in the next couple of months. So, yeah, we'll talk more about those when the time comes. But you don't need to have read those books in order for this one to make sense, and I really like that. In terms of what I didn't like, I didn't really have that many problems with this book. Very much the same thing that I have with most of McCaffrey's work, is that I didn't really have a whole lot of problems. The pacing is okay. Throughout, it's mostly consistent. There isn't a whole lot of detail given on the technology. As far as I could see, it's not really explained in this book how certain things work, which I thought would add to the world building just a tiny bit. It also doesn't really help that the time skips in the book. She goes into cold sleep at the start of the book, and then the next the chapter where she wakes up, we find out that it's been 10 years. And I have to admit that the time skips felt just a little bit forced. I don't know. It's just I'm not used to seeing. This character goes to sleep and then wakes up 10 years later like nothing happened. It would have been nice, I think, to kind of see what was happening with some of the other characters. For example, Lindsay's daughter Fiona. What was she doing in the time that her mother was away? It would have been nice just to see that, just to get like a hint of it. And we get that information later on in the book, but it's not quite the same thing as actually seeing it happen. It happens, as they say, off screen, right, or backstage kind of thing, which I have to admit kind of irritated me. But yeah, that was really, I think, the biggest problem that I had. The pirates as well. There are a few mentions of the pirates, and there's one encounter with them, but there isn't really a whole lot of information that's given to the book, or to the pirates, sorry. Another thing I really didn't like was how quickly we're introduced to different characters. In the first, maybe the first chapter, basically, we meet half a dozen characters within the first few pages. And, I mean, yes, as I said, they're all more or less unique, but because of how fast you're introduced to these characters, you don't um, you don't really get time to get to know them. You meet them, you stay with them for a couple of pages, and then something happens, and you basically lose most, if not all of them, right? And eventually it all kind of just blends together. It's very much like it was kind of the problem I had with Tower in the Hive, with the Tower in the Hive series, where you've got so many characters that it becomes very hard to keep track of them all. And in this case, it's even worse, because where the Tower in the Hive series had specific characters, you had the Rowan, you had Damia, you had Laria and Theon in the third book, you had Afra and Damia in the second book, you had the Rowan and Jeff Raven in the first book. The story's mostly focused on those characters, on a core set of characters. And while most of the Death of Sleep focuses on Lunzi, there are so many characters, like side characters, that are introduced every couple of pages or every few chapters or so, that eventually they all kind of just blend into each other, which kind of frustrated me a little bit. The ending as well, I mean, I'm not going to spoil it, but it felt very forced in terms of, okay, well, okay, in context it works, you know. For goodness sakes, these guys just survived a mutiny by people that are several times bigger and stronger than they are. So, of course, the ending works, but I don't know, it didn't feel right. It didn't kind of gel very well with the rest of the story, you know? It kind of felt just a little bit scrambled, a little bit forced, like, you know, oh, yeah, we don't have an ending, so how are we going to end this? And they kind of just slap the ending together at the end of the book without really sort of putting it together. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm not, I really don't know. But yeah, I thought the ending was a little bit forced. Overall, I mean, it's a good book. It's definitely worth reading if you haven't read it already. It's a good standalone novel. So, as I've already said a couple of times, would I recommend it to people? Sure. You know, if you're a fan of Anne McCaffrey, or you're not really, you've read a couple of her books and you're kind of looking for something different just to kill time, then yeah, check it out. I mean, I don't think you'll regret it. It's definitely an enjoyable read if you can get past the numerous characters and the time skips and that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, check it out if you haven't already. Thanks for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed the review. It's probably not as structured as I normally would like. I've gone off on several tangents, I know, but yeah. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and the next one is Generation Warriors, the third book in the trilogy. So I'm really looking forward to the book, to Generation Warriors. Sassenach was great. The Death of Sleep was excellent. I was genuinely surprised. Let's see if the third book is just as good as the other two. I want to know how this story ends. So, yeah. I will see you guys next time for Generation Warriors, and that should be in the next couple of weeks with any luck. Cheers. See you next time.